Okay, good evening. We're going to begin in just a few moments here as we're going to, we've had a lot going on in this room here, but Brother Swanson will come up in just a moment to present tonight. I think a very helpful look at Jerusalem and just a lot of the aspects of what happened around Christ's time here on this earth there. So as soon as he's ready, we'll have him come up. So you're welcome to keep coming on in. This is not an official start, but you're in the right place. We decided that even though we said fellowship hall, with the sound issues we were having this morning and some other factors, we said let's just come to the auditorium. You can see well on the screen. We get this all hooked up finally here. So maybe give another minute or two and we'll get started. Thank you. So that means you're allowed to fellowship and talk and until he starts.
Well, greetings. How's everybody doing? Have a good afternoon? How many got their naps? Okay, there'll be no sleeping out here then. All right. Well, we ought to get started. We've got a lot to cover. And honestly, there's way more that we could cut than we have time for in this session. But I do want to cover some different time spans, and I'm going to try not to lose anybody. I don't know if we'll have time for questions or not. But we're going to see if we can get this to work. Anybody know what that says? I heard some good guesses. There it is. All right, so we're going to go to Jerusalem. Before we do, though, I want you to consider 3 verses that you may not have heard of. The Lord loveth the gates of Zion more than all the dwellings of Jacob. Just let that soak in for a minute. All the dwellings of Jacob, what would that include? New York City? Well, there are a lot of Jews there. But no, all of Israel. So what is that saying? What's his favorite? Jerusalem. If Zion is synonymous with Jerusalem, we'll find out. For the Lord hath chosen Zion, he hath desired it for his habitation. That's pretty important. He's chosen it. Look upon Zion, the city of our solemnities. Thine eyes shall see Jerusalem. In other words, if you're looking at Zion, you're seeing Jerusalem. They're one and the same. A quiet habitation, a tabernacle that shall not be taken down. Not one of the stakes thereof shall ever be removed, neither shall any of the cords thereof be broken. Probably not a city that you would want to go up against, in other words. That's God's place, God's city. Isaiah 33:20. How many of you, if I could, now we've got the big screen, so it's not really feasible here, but in the classroom we might be able to. How many of you believe that you could come to a map like that and put your finger on Jerusalem? Could you do that? Okay. All right, good. That was a vast majority. Some are chuckling because they're glad that I don't have that possibility of doing such, asking you that. But honestly, a believer should be able to do that. If that's God's habitation and that's very important to Him, then you should not only be able to put your finger on Israel, you should be able to put your finger on Jerusalem inside of Israel. I want to look at just some varieties of map. I don't want to assume that anybody here knows Israel, knows what Jerusalem looks like, so we're going to kind of start at the beginning. The country of Israel has about 9.5 million as a population. It's slightly smaller in size than New Jersey. So you can just think of New Jersey. Frankly, they have nearly the same population too. Okay, I see some Jersey people down here, so smiling, so we got their attention. So it's slightly smaller in size with slightly greater population than New Jersey, but very, very close. About 75% are Jews. 75%. Is that less than you would have thought? 75%? About 20% are Palestinian Arabs, and then about 5% other nationalities there. The map there on your left shows population. You might wonder what those brown splotches are. That's population. The darker the color, the more dense the population. And are you seeing Jerusalem there? Can you pick it out? That map is also showing what's called the West Bank. It's showing Gaza, and I actually had to add the Golan Heights, which is that portion right up there that Israel acquired in 1967. All of that area that you see, though, that is tan or brown, is under the control of the modern state of Israel. Now, eventually, we're going to narrow this down and go to Jerusalem because this is Easter and we want to head that direction. The right map is topographical. You probably gained that. And so it's fairly hilly, mountainous of sorts. You can see them side by side. And there are a lot of things going on in Israel, even today. Have you seen Israel in the news? How many of you have seen Israel in the news lately? Okay, still quite a few hands. All right, so right now, Ramadan and Easter and the Passover, all happening at the same time, and that's causing, it does about every year, causes trouble, especially when they're concentrated and overlapping. And so right now, in Israel, there are significant riots that have broken out since about last Friday. And hundreds have been arrested, and it's ongoing there. Just another map there showing the West Bank, and you probably know where Jerusalem is in that. This is a satellite image showing Israel. I like to show this because it just, I don't know, to me it's neat. How many like maps? Come on, you're with me. Ah, nice. Okay, I feel better. All right, so this shows Israel. Hey, look, if this looks like the surface of the moon to you and you can't figure it out, then you need to be in class, okay? Because you should be able to see the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea, right? And what's the big one? Mediterranean, I'm hearing it. Okay, good. And so, let's just look at this for a minute. This is the Mediterranean. 700 feet below the Mediterranean is the Sea of Galilee. This is 700 feet below this. So I wouldn't dig a ditch from here to there. That wouldn't be good. All right. And then you have the Jordan Valley here and the Dead Sea down here. That's 1,400 feet below the Mediterranean. Or another 700 feet downhill from the Sea of Galilee. All right, that's fairly significant. You can see the hills of Judea and Galilee, the region here. From this point here, you strike a line over here, you come across these mountains. This is Lebanon, right here. Right here is Tyre. North of there would be Sidon. We're reversed. We're looking at this from the north. And that's where Jezebel was from. And then, of course, the rest of this is Israel. This right here is Mount Carmel. Mount Carmel, this ridge line here, and this valley that runs from just north of Mount Carmel all the way through here into the Jordan Valley. What is that valley called? The Jezreel Valley, also the Valley of Megiddo, where Armageddon will be fought. Many battles have been fought there over the centuries, really. Napoleon was there. And then we come up north here. This is Mount, I heard it here, Mount Hermon. The tallest mountain in the area is right here. That's kind of the corner of northern Israel. That's as far north as Israel goes. So Israel comes up the coast to this point here, shoots across. This is all Israel in here. This is Israel. Israel comes up to Mount Hermon and then comes back. This, right here, this green plateau is called the Golan Heights. Okay, that's a big deal. I wish we had time just to go in the Golan Heights, but that was captured by Israel in 1967 and held. One of the world's most significant tank battles was fought there in 1973. That was quite a tank battle up on the Golan Heights here. Israel kept it. They held that ground. And then down here, this is the modern day country of Jordan. Of Jordan. Israel actually goes down to this point right here, where there's a city named Elat. Now it's interesting, from this green area here, you strike a line there, and that's the border of Israel. You can almost see a line right there. It is interesting that Israel, for the most part, is fairly green until you go down into the Negev in the very south part, and it's green because they water it. They do, significantly. From the Jordan River and other supplies, they water their nation, so it's fairly lush all the way around. Nazareth and Jerusalem. There. And here's what's been going on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, where youths and adults, Palestinian Arabs, are there defending their Temple Mount. They don't really own it, but Israel lets them manage it. And anyway, it creates a lot of tension there. And so these are some pictures of just the other day on the Temple Mount, which looks like this. Now again, this is iconic. You probably have seen this. You know that's Jerusalem. Well, we should get to know this a little bit in this session. We are looking at it from the south side. Okay, so kind of get your bearings on this thing. Some of the pictures I have will show it from different sides, and I don't want you to get confused. We're looking at it from the south here. And you're seeing the Dome of the Rock there, the Al-Aqsa Mosque that, I don't know, yesterday I think it was, hundreds of Israeli soldiers stormed that mosque looking for some characters in there. They found them and they arrested all kinds of people. It is a real challenge going on right now. That you see there is the Temple Mount that Herod the Great restored, built. He put those walls up and backfilled them so that this flat area would be the size of 35 acres. I don't know, maybe some of you can't picture 35 acres, but that's a chunk of land. That's a lot of land. That is way bigger than you think it is. That's a lot of area. And for the most part, the Arabs, the Palestinian Arabs, aren't in control of it. You're not going to see really many Jews up there at all, unless they want to riot. I've never been up there. I've begged tour guides to go up there. They don't seem too anxious to take you up there. They don't like to be up there. And yet that is where Solomon's temple, then Zerubbabel's temple, which was fashioned then, remodeled into Herod's temple. The second temple was both Zerubbabel and Herod. And we'll get a little bit of a picture of this. On this side over here is the Kidron Valley. Kidron. On this side, this is steeply downhill, this is downhill, and that goes down into what's called the city of David. They're now just discovering more and more of the city of David. Most of the city, though, is out to the west and the north here. And so this is a picture from the east side. Kidron Valley is at the bottom now. It's a deep ravine. I'm sure it was deeper in old times. Just off this, south, would be the Garden of Gethsemane. And we might see a little better picture of it here shortly. On the other side, the west retaining wall is the west wall, the Wailing Wall. And that's just over, you can see some people right there. I don't know if you can see them. Right on the other side of this is the Western Wall. That's where Jews themselves go to write out prayers. They'll stick them in the wall there, asking the Lord to return, the Messiah to come. Many of them, of course, are unaware or blinded to the fact that He already has come. And so many things have happened on this. This Temple Mount is sitting on a mount its own. It's sitting on a mount that Herod expanded because it wasn't flat. It was kind of a dome shape. And so he had to put retaining walls up to flatten it out and backfill it so that it would make this 35 acres of flat area. But though the mount that it's sitting on is called Mount Moriah. Mount Moriah. Do you know anything else that happened on Mount Moriah? Okay, Abraham brought Isaac here to sacrifice him, and we know that story. That happened here. And of course, the Lord did that for our sakes so that we would understand what He was going to do yet in the future, which now is in the past. Just some pictures so that you can see once all of that was destroyed in 70 A.D. by the Romans, by General Titus, then it just was not much of anything for hundreds and hundreds of years. It was there. I think there at various times there were temples up there to gods. There was a garbage dump on top of the Temple Mount, and then the Muslims decided that they would clean it up a little bit and that they could make some significance out of that area. And so the Temple Mount there in Jerusalem to the Muslims is the third most holy place in the world. The third most holy place after Mecca and Medina. Okay, after those two, then the Temple Mount becomes the third. This is the place where at the end of Muhammad's life, he came here supposedly on a winged horse with Gabriel, and from here ascended into heaven at the Temple Mount. And so that makes it significant to them. And so there, during our Civil War, 1862, this is what the Temple Mount looked like. So Ulysses S. Grant, Abraham Lincoln, and the Temple Mount. You have a little hard time kind of putting those together? Because one's supposed to be in the Bible or such, and Abraham Lincoln's not in the Bible. So it is good for us to be reminded, though, that these things overlap. Yes, there was a Temple Mount in Abraham Lincoln's day, and that's what it looked like. It looked a little peaked, a little run down, even in the 1920s, didn't look so good. It's about a 1,000-year-old building, and a lot of funds have gone into it to restore it into what it is today. Inside, in the floor, I don't think I put a picture in here of it, but under that dome is a rock in the floor that's supposed to be the very place where Abraham was there. Now they substitute Ishmael for Isaac, making Muslims make Ishmael the promised son, the son of promise. All right, now let's familiarize ourselves with the map of Jerusalem a little bit. This is an Old Testament version of Jerusalem. And so you want to look and you want to find that the original city of Jerusalem is right here. That's it. That was the first. That's what David encountered with the Jebusites. And that's what he conquered. It would be later then that above this city on a higher ground up here is where Solomon would build his temple. Of course, we don't know exactly what that looked like since it was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. But the entire city originally was inside this little sliver here. And it would eventually grow outside the walls to the west. And then notice that there are 3 valleys. Do you see those? They're greenish. To the right, the Kidron Valley we already talked about, and across it, the Mount of Olives and the Garden of Gethsemane would eventually be down in this area. Then there's a valley here that's not as deep. It is on here on this map, it's called the Central Valley. It's also later called the Cheesemaker Valley. And it's been mostly filled in today, so it's not as, you wouldn't even hardly know there's a valley there today. The main valleys are this one, and then right out here, the Valley of Hinnom, where they would burn their trash, and it would continue to burn and burn and burn. And so that gives you a little bit of the picture there. And then there's just some graphics here that will help you to maybe see a little bit of that. The city of David, again, the modern city had built over the top of it, so Israel today is digging under houses and streets and finding their ancient roots that go back to the time of David. That's 3,000 years ago. His palace would have been on the upper side of this, up in the upper corner. So this goes down, 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 and then steeply into the valley. Remember, the Kidron Valley is up this way. Kidron Valley. And the palace here, there is no temple up here on the Temple Mount yet. But there you can see it pictured, and you can see this one would show the water sources inside the city, which are key to an ancient city in order to be able to withstand an enemy that might be there outside. You need a water source inside. And in this, you'll see how the water actually flows down to the Pool of Siloam. Does that ring a bell? Yeah, the Pool of Siloam, way down at the bottom there, where Jesus told a man to go wash your eyes in the Pool of Siloam and come back seeing. This is what that looks like. Now, these pictures maybe aren't the best. I didn't actually take this, but as you can imagine. But you can see maybe a little bit of the outline of the city of David here, and then the Kidron Valley, and over here, the Garden of Gethsemane. You see the Temple Mount. We're looking at it from the south side. Everybody sees that, right? And again here, you can kind of begin to remember that shape of the city of David. And it really drops down. It's quite a steep decline as you walk down to the Pool of Siloam from the south side of the Temple Mount. Now this will show those 3 valleys. And I have a little bit of a graphic here that you can see matching up to an 1858 map, which would be just before our Civil War. And you can see the topography there. There's the steep Kidron Valley that runs to the east of the Temple Mount. Then the Central or Cheesemaker Valley. And then the Valley of Hinnom. Obviously, then the land in between those valleys is a rise, correct? You say, why are we looking at this? It's rather important to what we're going to actually think about. Now remember Mount Moriah. You're not forgetting Mount Moriah, right? That's where Isaac was brought to be sacrificed, Mount Moriah. That has very much significance to it, Mount Moriah. And then I want you to notice Mount Zion. Mount Zion is over here, in this area. This is a high area, and this is a high area. And there's slightly lower areas in between. All right, we'll come back to that. You can see the high area, that's Mount Moriah, running up that direction. Notice how it curves around. That's very important. You see that? I did not understand this until maybe my second time to Israel. I've been there 3 times, but my second time, we were in some tunnels near the Temple Mount, and we were looking at a scaled kind of a table. It had a scale on it of the Temple Mount. And it was our guide then that said something that clicked with me concerning Mount Moriah. Because you have a Temple Mount there, but Jesus didn't die on the Temple Mount, did he? Did Jesus die on the Temple Mount? No. Well, I thought, how could he, what would Mount Moriah be if Jesus didn't die on it? Okay, but look at it. Mount Moriah is not just one peak. It's a ridge that continues. Then it clicked. Okay, you'll see that again in a minute. This is very significant. This then is the rise to Mount Zion. Now, in the scripture, though, we understood by what we read that Mount Zion can definitely be synonymous with Jerusalem. That's fine. No problem. Mount Moriah could be too, but many times it's called Zion. And honestly, those Jews who in the late 1800s became very burdened to have a nation of their own were called Zionists. And they had a Zionist conference and congress in Europe. And that was all about getting back to their homeland. So Zion is very significant to the Jews, but Zion is that mount right there. All right, again, you see the city of David. You see over here the Garden of Gethsemane. The green area in this, right in here, the Garden of Gethsemane. And the city of David is in red here. The Kidron Valley goes that direction. The Central Valley, the Valley of Hinnom, is coming up around this way. And this is Mount Zion over here. You can kind of see this is a tall area here, tall area that continues from the Temple Mount there. And this actually shows you just how steep things are. The high hill in the distance is the Mount of Olives. What happened on the Mount of Olives? Jesus ascended, and this same Jesus that has gone up from you shall so come in like manner as you have seen him go. What's that mean? He's coming right there again. When he does, that mountain is going to split north to south, and Jesus is going to walk into his temple at that point, the third temple, from the Mount of Olives. At the foot of that is going to be the Garden of Gethsemane. So let me just begin to maybe point it out here so that you can begin to see. Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane praying that night, right? And that's where Judas came with quite a little army to get him. And so they arrested him there, and his disciples did what? Scattered, right? How many of them? All of them. Kind of like all we like sheep have gone astray, sort of. And from there, they would bring Jesus then to Annas and Caiaphas. It's interesting. We should have those guys come right back up here again, and we could line them up here, couldn't we? They wouldn't look the same. Now you'd recognize them. All right, so listen. The Jews and others have loved to point out where all of these places are. And on some of them, they might be right. They might be. That's fine. But to be honest, in 70 AD, this city was leveled. I read something the other day that said that even if in 70 you were a resident, you grew up there, and all of a sudden in come the Romans and they besiege the city and they rip it up. I mean, they tear it up, burn it, they're breaking it down, and you flee. And you come back in a few weeks. And this particular person writing about this said, you're going to have a hard time finding your way around. You'd have a hard time finding your house. Look at pictures of Ukraine. It might get the picture there. But kind of laid out, I think we can come somewhat close. And some of the places, I think they genuinely have discovered the right thing. Christ would have been arrested over in this area. He would have been brought across the Kidron Valley over into this area, where somewhere here, probably outside the wall. Now understand, these walls are not the same walls that would have been there in Jesus' day. Right? The Romans ripped those down 40 years later. The walls that are there today were built much later by the Muslims. But outside that wall, it is believed that they have found Caiaphas' house. And on that point, they're probably right, based on not what the home, I'll show it to you here in a minute, not what the home looks like, or the building, because that's all been rebuilt, but what was underneath the building. That's a little bit more significant, and I think I've got some pictures of that. So they would have brought him over here to Caiaphas' house, somewhere in this area here, and then from there he would have gone right over in this northwest corner of the Temple Mount. And there was a particular structure known as you've done well with names. Anybody know what it was? The Fortress Antonia, named after Mark Antony, a personal friend of Herod the Great's. He built it in honor of Mark Antony. Well, whatever happened to Mark Antony? Didn't bode so well for him, right? There was a civil war in the Roman Empire. Mark Antony and Cleopatra against Octavian. How'd Mark Antony do? He come out on top? That almost cost Herod the Great his kingdom, perhaps even his life. He took a plane and he went to Rome, and he got in front of Octavian and begged for his life and his kingdom, and somehow he came out a winner and kept everything. But anyway, the Castle Antonia, sometimes it's called the castle, sometimes the fortress. This is looking up the Kidron Valley from down in the Kidron Valley. I took this picture myself, and just up and around the corner, this direction is the Garden of Gethsemane, but you can see how steep it is. Even yet, and in ancient days, I'm sure it would have been steeper. These things have a tendency to fill in. To the right, up this direction, is under Palestinian control. And here's another picture of the same, a little further down. And so these right here, this is Palestinian Arab. Now, this is a New Testament version of Jerusalem, and yet you're becoming familiar with it. This has Caiaphas' house here, and that's probably it's further down than that. The Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus arrested here, brought over here to see Annas and Caiaphas, spent the night in a cell in the basement of Caiaphas' house, and early the next morning was taken to Pilate. So he's going to go from here, some way wind his way through the streets to the castle, the fortress Antonia, which that itself has been completely ripped down. Just maybe 4 or 5 years after the Apostle Paul was in it. in the book of Acts. At the end of the book of Acts, he was there. And he was preaching from the steps of it to a crowd that almost killed him. That's where he was, Castle Antonium. Jesus was probably down in the lower areas of that castle being interrogated at the judgment seat there of Pilate. And, so he's there, and then, Pilate can't get any resolution to this thing, and then he learns that Jesus is from Galilee. So what does he do? Sends him to Herod. Herod's palace is here. So from here, he's sent to Herod, across the city. And Herod says, wow, I really have wanted to see you for a long time. But he himself, he doesn't get any satisfaction out of it. Jesus is mocked there and sent back to Pilate, where the Jews then, he's back into the fortress, and from there, the Jews are able to convince Pilate to crucify him. Now the big question comes. This is the big one. From where, or to where, from that fortress does Jesus go for crucifixion and to be buried? And then, of course, to rise from the grave. There are two theories, if we could call it that. And the first and the longest one is that from here, he's going to there, west. That's something that happened in about the 3rd century, and so that was marked out as the place of the crucifixion and the tomb. And the Crusaders came and they worshiped there. They thought that was the place as well in the 11th and 12th, 13th centuries. And ever since, for about 1,700 years now, many, many people have thought, well, that's it right there. It's got to be the place. And so the road that winds through city streets today from here to here is called the Via Dolorosa, the Way of Sorrow. Here's a little bit closer version. I just zoomed in on the map so you can see here the possibilities here from the Castle Antonia. So we're going to take a look at that. All right, let's show some pictures. This is a rebuild of Caiaphas' house down in that lower area. It's really a church that was built over this of sorts. It is the one that's commonly believed to be Caiaphas' house. This is where Jesus was brought here, if they have it right. And just a picture of that. This is not a replica. This is what they found under this foundation, is this cell. And it's down in there. You've got to climb some winding stairs to get down in there. And this pastor will reference this as being one of the most significant places spiritually for him in all of Israel. To be down in this area here, to sing a hymn, to pray down there, realizing that Jesus likely, yes, spent the night here, had already prayed, Father, if it be thy will, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, thy will be done. And was for it, and was down here as pastor. I've heard him say this in that area more than once. Jesus thought of me here. And it's kind of stunning. These are the steps leading up to Caiaphas' house. Again, the building is not new, it's not old. It's a fairly new structure, but these cobbled steps might have been those that Jesus was led roughly then from the Garden of Gethsemane across the Kidron Valley up this. When I was first there 10 years ago, you could walk them. Now they've gated them off because people were picking up the stones and taking them home with them. Seems like your luggage would be too heavy to get on the plane, but I don't know how they were doing it. So now you can't walk them anymore, but anyway, kind of fascinating. Now this, let me show you this. This is thought to be the judgment seat of Pilate. And it's not been that recent, not long ago, that they have discovered it. As they continue to dig and find, you understand the city has been built on and rebuilt and remodeled over the last centuries. And they're thinking that this is where Jesus was judged by Pilate. Now, I want to take you just briefly to a church that is the church built over the spot that many have for 1,700 years thought Jesus was crucified and buried underneath this church. They found both places. Well, this is where he died and this is where he was buried, and then they put a church over the whole thing, and so it's all indoors, and this is a diagram of what that would look like. So if you're Catholic or Orthodox, this is what you're going to point to. This is definitely where they say, and I showed it to you, west at the end of the Via Dolorosa, that way of sorrow, this is what you would find if you go in there. Consequently, there are just millions of people from around the world just wanting to get there, get inside there and see the inside. And then this is what it looks like. This is Calvary for them, Golgotha. And as in many places in Israel, or probably around the world, that they want to venerate, it's just steeped in idolatry. And you walk in and you don't get a sense of light and liberty, but kind of darkness. So this is the place of the crucifixion to a Catholic, Orthodox, and this is the place of the tomb. This rock, this flat rock, is the place where they say that he was laid. Now you're probably saying, that's not what I've seen. Right. Okay. I want to go over the history of that with you, just so you can see. Now let me give you a history lesson. Are you okay with history? Okay, bear with me now. In 1738, a man named Jonas Kort, who was a German publisher, came to Israel. Now, was it a nation, the nation of Israel at that point? No, George Washington was 6 years old. And Jonas Kort, a German, goes to Israel. And he goes and he looks at this church, the only place at that time where everybody was saying Jesus was crucified and buried and rose from the grave here, west. And he said this, he concluded that the church of the Holy Sepulchre was too close in proximity to Herod's temple to have been outside of Jerusalem city walls. And so for him, it was a big question mark. Now, I believe he was born again. And he just shook his head. In 1801, Edward Daniel Clark, an English theologian and mineralogist, concluded that Christ's crucifixion must have taken place in a different location than the west side of the city. In 1838, Edward Robinson, an American theologian, he thought it preposterous, for example, that Helena, Emperor Constantine's mother, would have just happened to have come across the actual cross of the Lord some 3 centuries later, which is presumed actually not that she found one, but she found all three, whole, after 300 years, and the city having been destroyed. But that is what the Catholics and Orthodox believe. He also found it a bit of a stretch to conclude that Golgotha would be situated so close to a burial tomb. They are very near. They're inside the same church. They're that close. But in 1848, Otto Athenius, a German theologian, discovered Jeremiah, what he called Jeremiah's grotto. And I'm going to show you a picture of it from over 100 years ago, nearly back to his day. This is what he saw, and I'll tell you why. Because genuinely born-again men were looking at the location that had been given for centuries, and they just were shaking their heads. They said, no, it just doesn't make sense. For one reason or another, these men were coming and they were saying, we don't buy it. There has to be another place, but they didn't know where. And then this man came, and he seems to be the first to notice something, this. 1882, 140 years ago, just a rocky hill. We're looking out the north side, not the west side, the north side of the city, standing on top of the Turkish walls that are there. And he sees that. Now, do you see anything? I've got more pictures, so if that doesn't do it for you. See, I see rock. Do you see two eyes? I'll go back. Do you see them? Golgotha, Aramaic for the skull. Calvary's Latin for the skull. So, in 1850, an American comes and he agrees with Otto Thenius. In 1858, Henry Baker, and another American theologian preacher, comes and he agrees. They look at that, and we're getting close to our Civil War, while these men are going over there and they're taking a look at that. Finally, in 1883, Charles George Gordon, an English major general, he popularizes this. So much so that people think that he was the first to find it, but he wasn't. And he was visiting with a friend of his, H.G. Spafford. Horatio and Anna Spafford had an apartment on top of the walls of Jerusalem, looking over that same escarpment, that rock. And General Gordon, a British general, looks out there and he sees it. Now, I think he'd already read about it, so he's looking out there and he says, that's got to be it. In fact, this is what more of the time that he saw it, and you can see here, there's the eyes. And he said, I feel for myself convinced that the hill near the Damascus gate is Golgotha. From it, you can see the temple, the Mount of Olives, and the bulk of Jerusalem. His stretched out arms would, as it were, embrace it. All day long have I stretched out my arms, Isaiah 65:2. Close to it is the Slaughterhouse of Jerusalem. Quite pools of blood are lying there inside the city as they slaughtered animals. It is covered with the tombs of Muslims. There are many rock-hewn caves and gardens surround it. And up on top, you can begin to see the graves. The reason that no church was ever built on this spot is because there are Muslim graves on top of it. And you can't build a church on top of a graveyard. He went on to say, now the place of execution in our Lord's time must have been and continued to be an unclean place. So to me, this hill is left bare ever since it was first used as a place of execution. It is very nice to see it so plain and simple instead of having a huge church built on it. Charles Gordon, general, wrote to his sister. Picture of it in 1901. Notice the height. You can see the Muslim graves on top. You can still see the face of the skull. Over at the side here, beyond this wall, is a garden. It's 120 feet taller here on top of that than the Temple Mount. And I don't know if you can get a picture of the view. And down here is the road to Damascus. Comes out the Damascus gate. I was stunned as I looked at that again. You know, we see Jesus, we see a picture of a cross on top of a hill. You could have seen this for miles. You could have seen it for miles. What He did for us. This is what it looks like today. There's a bus company, a parking lot for buses underneath it, but the eyes are still there, even after 2,000 years of erosion. And right here is a set of bleachers that are beyond that wall. They're inside the garden. And from there, that land owned by the Garden Tomb Association, a Protestant organization funded out of Israel, purchased that land back in the 1800s and maintain it. And that is where we believe it's very possible the Garden Tomb. So crucified here, you can see the number of graves on top of it, but Jesus crucified here and a tomb nearby. And this is a picture inside the garden area here of folk now waiting to get in. This is actually a picture that we took, and this one. The tomb itself was discovered in 1867. 1867. In other words, it was overgrown, buried, had to be dug out again. There's evidence that crusaders used it maybe for their horses. And that would be perhaps why this has been broken into and restored. Had to throw that one in there. Biased. And a picture inside, I don't think I had a lot of pictures inside, but our thought would be that this is where the body of Jesus lay. And I'm telling you, if you ask me, you think this is the place? Yeah, I think this is the place. I really do. I believe this is it. That Jesus' body lay right in here. There's some evidence there. It's a little hard to capture on, I didn't take this picture, but it's difficult to actually show this unless you see it. That it seems as though that somebody chiseled away at the length of that slab to make it 3 or 4 inches longer at the last minute. As though the one who, it's almost as though somebody was laid here that wasn't designed for and might have been a little taller than the one that it was hewn for. Very interesting. Well, okay, we got to wrap it up. Maybe we'll go again sometime. Any questions? Quick question. No? Yes, sir.
You're going to tell the significance of Mount Moriah?
Mount Moriah, okay. Mount Moriah, you see how it went around? Thank you. Mount Moriah does not take a left turn and go over to where the Catholic Church is. Do you understand that? Their spot, their church, is not on Mount Moriah. That would be a problem, wouldn't it? That's good. You picked up on that. That's good. But that is Mount Moriah. That's very significant and biblical. And we like to be biblical, right? Okay. All right, I got to let you go. Very good. Thank you. Thank you.